You can catch the Flyers multiple times this week across ESPN platforms. Thursday, the Flyers versus the Rangers in primetime at 8 p.m. on ESPN. And then this Saturday, you can catch Bob Wischusen on the call for Flyers and Bruins, 3 p.m. on ABC. And Bob Wischusen is back with us as we are celebrating the NHL's return from the Olympic break. Bob, is not just that the Team USA won, it's that the entire NHL is finally back in action, and it starts tonight. Bob, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm bored. It's been a while.
Well, tell me then, you said you're bored. Is there a storyline that now that the NHL is back that you are looking forward to the most?
You know, it was the Penguins. Whether or not they could hang on, whether or not they could, better than hang on. They've been one of the best teams in the league. Like, could they actually, at the trade deadline, add some pieces? They have a ton of draft capital and give the Crosby, Malkin, Letang trio a legit run at it, maybe their last run at it. But now Crosby's out for a month. So I guess it's a different kind of intrigue. Now I'm wondering, when he comes back, where will they be? And, how do they approach the trade deadline knowing he's out? So, to me, I think they're the most intriguing team in the league because of those legends and whether or not they actually have a team they think is good enough if they add to it to try and take a run.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, for those who might not have been paying attention to the NHL season up until, the end of the football season, they might not realize that some of the biggest names in, for example, the Eastern Conference, they're not where you expect them to be, right? You got a team in Florida, they are right now very far out of the playoff hunt. A team like the Bruins, they're hanging on for dear life in the wild card. And frankly, Bob, if you would have told me that the Sabres would be a wild card team, I would have told you need to stop drinking.
Yeah, the Sabres were the hottest team in the league for a 2-month stretch. They didn't lose. So they played themselves from the bottom of the conference into not even a wild card spot for a while, but into, a top 3 spot in their division for a while. There have been a couple of teams in the East specifically, Tampa, Buffalo, Boston there for a while, Montreal, but those teams didn't lose for a long time, and it really tightened the race up. And you're right. Now the Bruins are hanging on to that last playoff spot. If the playoffs were to start tomorrow, they would have the last spot in the East. And I guess you'd probably go down as far as the Flyers and Panthers for the teams that mathematically are kind of still in it. The Devils and Rangers, I think, are cooked. The Flyers and Panthers might be cooked too. I don't know. They have a lot of teams to jump over, but the Bruins are still in must-win mode. There's no question.
Absolutely. And, of course, this Saturday you will be on the call for the Flyers versus the Bruins, 3 p.m. on ABC. You mentioned the Flyers. It's interesting because early in the season there was a kind of a vibe, Bob, where here in the Philadelphia area we were like, hey, maybe the Flyers could break their playoff list streak, right? And then things started going downhill. It was like they ran out of juice, they ran out of energy. And then all this talk about, Taka versus Mishkov. Is it real? Is it not? And now we're coming out of the break, and it seems like everything is kumbaya. What is the national perspective on the Flyers here?
I feel as if every moment that they spend legitimately either in a playoff spot or in the playoff race, they're even at best, exceeding expectations, if not, they have no firepower. They are clearly a team that's still building for the future. I don't think they're going to add at the trade deadline. Michkov has been an inconsistent disappointment this year. There's no question. The goaltending situation has been a mess. Sam Ersson has been, unfortunately, one of the worst regularly used goalies in the NHL. But they certainly still have some pieces on their team but they're still 2 or 3 years away. I look at where they are in the standings in a completely different world than I look, say, at the Capitals or, you mentioned the Panthers being back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. And the Flyers are right there with those teams.
Right.
Barely hanging on in the playoff race, but their organization is in a totally different place than those teams. And, I've seen a lot of positives out of, the kind of the young talent that they have. Trevor Zegras has found a brand new career, and he's still a baby in the league. He is the better part of his career out in front of him. Christian Dvorak is a nice player. I mean, they do some nice young players, but they still need time, and they need Michkov to become much more like what that rookie class is becoming, and he hasn't joined the party, right? Like, he has watched, the Celebrinis, the guys that are in kind of his age group, right? The super high draft picks over the last 2 or 3 years, Connor Bedard, so on and so forth. Now the Islanders have obviously a generational talent, it seems, at defense. I like Michkov needs to show that he can be one of those guys, and he has not done that yet. So to me, that's probably the biggest disappointment.
ESPN play-by-play broadcaster Bob Wischusen joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget, this Saturday, Flyers and Bruins on ABC. Bob will be on the call. Of course, you can also hear the game right here on your home for Flyers hockey in South Jersey, 97.3 ESPN. Bob, you mentioned about the whole Michkov thing, because I think it's interesting that you say that there are some positives. In this area, there's a kind of a vibe where it's like, we've been waiting for 5-6 years now to get back to the playoffs. And Bob, I keep reminding people that you can't treat the current administration, the current contingent of Keith Jones and Danny Briere, and blame them for what Chuck Fletcher did. I feel like people kind of forget that there was a different GM, a different group of people running this organization the last time they made the postseason to where they are now.
Yeah, look, I do in the NFL, I do the Jets on the radio and have been around the Jets for 30 years, saying the same thing to Jet fans. And, of course, I've said it to them, 2 or 3 cycles over, that there's a reason that the current regime is the current regime. It's because the past regime didn't get it done. So the current regime, they should have the right to enact their plan. And they should have the ability to go through their rebuild and draft and develop and bring guys along. You're right. Like, you can't necessarily ask Keith Jones, Briere to go out and splash money all over the place on the free agent market and grab a bunch of 30-year-old guys, 35-year-old guys to come in to try to win right now because the previous regime didn't get it done. And I get it. When you are, and I've said this to Jets fans over and over again, fans that have been through multiple rebuilds want to hear the word rebuild the way that, like, a 3-year-old wants to see broccoli on his dinner plate, right? Like, you want cookies and milk, like, you want the ice cream, you want dessert, you want all the treats, and you want to enjoy what the other organizations that are winning and going to the playoffs are enjoying. But it doesn't change the fact that, like, the broccoli, you have to eat it and it's good for you. And it doesn't change the fact that if you are right now a Flyer fan understanding that a rebuild is necessary, it's because the previous rebuilds didn't work. That's why this regime's here. So, yes, I agree. Like, the Jets right now have a general manager in Darren Muji that traded 2 of their best defensive players last year to load up to get 5 first-round draft picks in the next 2 drafts. Now, that's really exciting to talk about in April, but by definition, that means they're probably going to be a bad team during the season because they've got all this draft capital, but they're going to be super young. Rookies don't often win in any sport, immediately. Same thing for the Flyers. The Flyers, with their draft capital, with the Michkovs, with, the other young talent that they have to give that time to develop. And these guys deserve the right to draft and develop, but it doesn't, I'm sure, make a Flyer fan feel any better to sit there and have to hear, okay, like, how many rebuilds are we supposed to go through before we can finally expect one to work?
Yeah, and it also goes as far back as when they, the Ron Hextall era, when they took Nolan Patrick, and then you have Cale Makar go a couple picks later, and you have a lot of Flyer fans, bemoaning that. There's been numerous instances where previous administrations passed up one guy for another guy, and you're right. It's not fun to talk about it in February and March, especially with the trade deadline around the corner. And Bob, you just mentioned the fact that they're probably not going to be active at the deadline. Is there a team or teams that you are the most curious about at the deadline?
Well, Pittsburgh to me is the most curious. Like they have over the next, I think, 3 years, I think they've got like 15 picks in the first 3 rounds over the next 3 years. I might not be getting those numbers exactly right, but it's something akin to that. They have more draft capital than any team in the NHL. And they've got Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Erik Karlsson, all at the end of their careers. So what do? Do you trade those picks? Are you aggressive? Do you go to a team like the Flyers and see if they're willing to give up a Konechny, right? A Sanheim? Like, are you going to give them even more of their future to get what you need, so you give those legends a chance to take a swipe at it and make a run? Or do you say, oh, all right, Sidney's out for a month. We might not even make the playoffs. Do we really want to abandon what we thought was going to be our long-term plan? Or maybe you kind of split the baby, right? Like maybe you try and trade some of the draft capital, but hold onto enough of it so that you still feel like you're really not mortgaging your future. So I would say of any of the teams right now that are, have big decisions to make, I think Pittsburgh is in a very interesting spot. And, I think Tampa Bay will probably look to add. Montreal's super young, so they're good, and they are a contender in the East. So I would say they probably will be active as well. But at least of the Eastern Conference teams, very interested to see what Pittsburgh decides to do and what Philadelphia decides to do and what the Rangers decide to do with some of the guys that they still have.
Well,
right? I'm almost stunned that Mika Zibanejad is still on the team. I mean, the way he played in the Olympics and in the seasons he's had, to me, Mika Zibanejad is a $15 stock right now, selling at, potentially $30 for the Rangers if they could find a buyer for him and if he would be willing to go somewhere.
Yeah, Zibanejad to me is one of the more interesting names because you just mentioned the Rangers. They're basically they're not just at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. They have zero chance of basically moving up the Eastern Conference. And they got all these. I mean, they already moved on from Panarin. Zibanejad seems like the most likely name. And by the way, for the Flyers, another name off the Olympics. Ristolainen played good in the Olympics. There's always teams that need defensemen.
Yes, there's no doubt. And I think, if I remember right, talking with a couple of people around Pittsburgh specifically, I think a right-handed D was something that they were going to potentially be in the market for. So the Flyers have a couple of candidates, to maybe at least make a call. I mean, right-handed defensemen are not easy to find. And, defensemen overall aren't easy to find. Top-pair defensemen are very tough to find. Letang got banged up, so they're wondering, I think, would like adding a veteran depth defenseman that could be second power play unit or top penalty kill unit, play 20 minutes a night. Would that be worth giving up some of the draft capital to go get?
And as you mentioned, the Olympics, they tend to amplify these guys' values sometimes. You got to take advantage of it if you're some of these teams. And he's Bob Wischusen. He'll be on the call this Saturday, Flyers versus Bruins on ABC at 3 p.m. And he joined us right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. And by the way, Bob, I do want to congratulate you re-signing your multi-year deal with ESPN. So it's definitely cool to still have you a part of the ESPN roster calling games, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, having hockey back at ESPN has been a blast.
All right, Bob, enjoy the game on Saturday.
Thanks.